On that same level of talking about authenticity, I did want to highlight a race that's happening here in Texas, which is going to a runoff between Jessica Cisneros and Henry Cuellar, who is one of the most odious conservative Democrats in the party. And we want to talk about this update with Nancy Pelosi here, but I put it towards the bottom of the chat, Matt. There's a video from Jessica that I think we should play because I think it's worth front loading this with just reminding people about the historic choice that people in that district have between, not just a bad Democrat, frankly, a reactionary one, and somebody who is not just a kind of typical Democratic Party member, but somebody who actually represents a much more progressive future for Texas and for the country. But let's just play this ad. This is about Medicare for all. And I just think it really highlights why Jessica is somebody you should be supporting.
Right.
When my tia Marta had cancer but no insurance, we did what many families do. We sold steak plates to pay for her care. But Henry Cuellar holds $1,000 a plate fundraisers, taking from the drug and insurance companies charging high prices or even denying us care. They support him, I support Medicare for all. That's the difference. I'm Jessica Cisneros, and I approve this message because no one should lose a loved one when they can't afford life-saving care.
And I wanted to start with this because I think the choice is very clear. One for voters, and two for anybody in the Democratic Party who might want that party to have a real future as to who they should be supporting. Jessica, in addition to supporting Medicare for all, this is somebody who supports the Green New Deal, right? Not just kind of vague environmental policies, federal policy to take control of these systems and run them democratically. Somebody who supports the PRO Act, is not timid about supporting workers. Is somebody who supports universal education, universal pre-K, tuition-free public college and trade school, and also eliminating student debt, right? And she's up against somebody who time and time again votes with the Republican Party, is fiercely anti-abortion, and equally devastating is extremely pro-oil. And I I wanted to talk about it just because I think it flows well with what we are talking with Nick Bolin about authenticity, because one of the takes that we get from folks is that Henry sort of represents more than Jessica, his constituents. And I'm going to tell you right now, that district, is in South Texas, goes all the way up to San Antonio. I'm all for internationalism, right? I'm all for building solidarity and relationships across the globe. But I'm going to tell you something right now that something that Henry Cuellar has that most people in that part of the country don't is very strong relationships with the Azerbaijan government. I hope I don't have to remind people, that just led a brutal war, where they were celebrating underneath the skulls of, killed Armenians. And Henry's house was recently raided by the FBI. Very likely, we're still waiting for the final reports, but the tip-off in the media has been for his relationship with the government of Azerbaijan. Should we let me just lay this stuff out first, then we can go to what the political soothsayer Nancy Pelosi has to say about this race.
Yeah.
But students in Texas A&M International University in Laredo have been able to go to Azerbaijan to study energy, business, and policy over the past few years. And this has been led because of Henry Cuellar's relationship with Azerbaijan. Now, if it was just that, that's fine, right? It's nice to give some people some culture, see different parts of the world. No, but this is somebody who has used their role in Congress to constantly lobby for the government of Azerbaijan. Most notably, in the recent crisis, and this is from The Intercept, reported by Li Fang and Ryan Grimm, Cuellar, a co-chair of the Congressional Azerbaijan Caucus, continued to promote Azerbaijan's interests. Following the devastating Armenia-Azerbaijan war in 2020, fought over the disputed region, Cuellar petitioned his congressional colleagues to ensure that any humanitarian aid for the conflict would be provided through the government of Azerbaijan or United Nations organizations, and not given directly to Armenia. In this raid, what has been the focus of controversy has been not just Cuellar's relationship with Azerbaijan generally, but most importantly, with state-run oil companies in Azerbaijan. Now, Cuellar loves gas, right? He loves oil, and he seems to have a real soft spot for oil that is produced in Azerbaijan. He has been one of the lead proponents pushing for Azerbaijan's Southern Gas Corridor project, arguing that this is in the U.S. national interest to support, to support more pipelines in that part of the world. Him and his wife has traveled to the country. He's brought other members of Congress to Azerbaijan. He's very, very close with an organization that's based here in Texas called the Turquoise Council of Americans and Eurasians, which is a Texas-based nonprofit. Most notably, with this gentleman, Kamal Oksuz. I apologize if I am mispronouncing that. But this is somebody who has now come clean and has pled guilty to federal crimes when it comes to hiding the source of funding for these congressional trips. So these congressional trips were presented as if they were initially approved by the Ethics Committee of Congress. It turns out that around $750,000 was spent by oil and gas interests in Azerbaijan to basically promote more and more connection between the people of the United States and Azerbaijan, right? This, again, I'm all for internationalism, right? But the Azerbaijan government is an extremely corrupt and violent one. It is one that is very, very far from what you could call a democracy. And Cuellar's relationship with this government just reeks the high heaven of somebody who's completely bought out. Now, you would only have to look at his voting record to recognize that. But the more that comes out to sort of, substantiate the claims that this guy isn't acting out of just a kind of general, let's all hold hands and, build an international community. This is somebody who is much more motivated by dollars and cents to the devastation of his community in South Texas.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's two elements of this, and because we are not proponents of anti-corruption politics, we think it is a substitution for the real class politics that are needed. But there are two elements of this. One is if the country you're dealing with isn't one you should be taking money with, and then two, do your domestic politics suck? And he is, like you said, one of, if not the worst Democrats. And there's a baseball concept called wins above replacement, which I think helpful to think about how much you should care about voting if you can vote in a certain election, which is the replacement level is the normal level. So just say your average pitcher or your average Democrat that you could just get if you had to replace somebody who got hurt, for instance, or got thrown in jail for corruption with Azerbaijan. That is, Cuellar is below that. Cuellar just replaced by a general Democrat would be an improvement. But Cisneros is actually a step above the average Democrat. So this is and this is why maybe we zip a little bit ahead to why leadership isn't super helpful for unseating this absolute I don't know what you call Cuellar, but bad guy.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, let's talk about Nancy Pelosi. And if you could pull this Texas Tribune piece, Nancy Pelosi paid my hometown a visit today.
Oh my God!
To say what she thought about this race. Nancy, this is Texas Tribune here. The scoop comes from a Patrick O'Lord Civic. I'm sorry if I mispronounced. I can't read very well from here. But Nancy Pelosi affirmed support for United States Representative Henry Cuellar after FBI raid, primary runoff burb. And, so there was the initial election. It was extremely close. And Jessica and Henry are in a runoff election that I believe will be held in May. So Nancy Pelosi is flying over here to talk to folks about the issues. And the issue here is that she thinks we shouldn't be supporting somebody who supports Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, PRO-Act, etc. And rather we should be supporting somebody who is the most conservative Democrat in Congress, somebody who constantly, we talk about Joe Manchin a lot, but this is somebody in the House who constantly is running interference against all of the basic, we're not even talking about good, lefty, socialist, social democratic policies. We're just talking about the basic kind of things that Joe Biden wants to get done. This is somebody who is constantly a thorn in their side. And she's showing up here to say that she thinks that people should be supporting Cuellar over Jessica Cisneros. Just if you needed any more examples, and I don't think people do anymore, of just how out of step this party is with one, its base. And also with the future, look no further than the way that Nancy Pelosi is weighing her, is putting her thumb on the scale of this really, really crucial election. And I think like what really pisses me off about all of this is like, look, we have to win, and it's not always a slam dunk that when we put somebody in an election who holds their policies, they're going to win every time, right? It's going to, it takes time, it takes work, it takes real organizing. But what really does piss me off is when you have these kind of pundits who jump in and say things like, well, Henry really understands the people of South Texas in a way that Jessica doesn't. When Jessica certainly is representing people in that region, people who struggle with access to healthcare, people who want Medicare for all, people who struggle with unfair wages and the hyper exploitation that happens in that part of the country. And is advocating for higher rates of unionization and for the United States government to finally stand up for working people by supporting the PRO Act, right? And instead of supporting her fully, the Democratic Party is out here saying that some guy who very, very clearly has pretty significant financial relationships with a government like Azerbaijan is more representative of people from South Texas. I'm sorry. I hate to be like this, but like, I can't tell you something that is the most as far away as possible from the everyday life of the vast majority of people of South Texas than the approval or disapproval of the government of Azerbaijan. It's just an absolutely ridiculous claim. It boggles the mind sometimes to see how willing that party is to go to bat for people as wicked as Henry Cuellar.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and as we wonder like why Biden didn't accomplish anything, it's because she's willing to go stick her neck out like this, and I just think it's useful just to drive home to folks that these people are obstacles, and yeah.
No, they're huge obstacles, and I also want to
Oh,
say
we have this other clip.
Yes, if you could. The funny thing about them, though, is like Nancy Pelosi in particular. They always come with these prepackaged excuses, and Nancy Pelosi's line here is that one. She says she's not aware of the investigation against Henry Cuellar, right? It's amazing. Pretty much anybody who's been paying any attention to politics in Texas knows about this. So, frankly, that's a lie. The second thing is that she then says like, well, I support incumbents, left or right. This is just a matter of principle for her. But it's funny how those principles seem to shift whenever it's politically expedient for her, because here's Nancy Pelosi, and I think this is also, kind of generally, not the most well-reasoned assessment, but this is Nancy Pelosi saying what her general rule is for supporting candidates. I believe this is from 2020.
Yep.
It's muted, Matt.
It's just, so we're going to fight them to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And that's just, so we're going to fight them in the Congress, in the country, and in the court of law to preserve all that means, the lives saved, the progress made, and then working together to take the best that any of us has to offer to go down that path. But as no reflection on who I would support for President of the United States, I'll just say, just generally, I usually always cast my vote for a woman. I just do. I have that opportunity.
Except, of course, if that person is supporting Medicare for all or the Green New Deal. At this point, rightfully so, people are disgusted by the state government of Texas for its brutal assault on women and on trans people. Those are serious issues that truly matter, right? And the Democratic Party loves, to sort of whip up their base around those, as they should. When it comes time to do something about it, they get really, really squeamish. Cuellar is somebody who's anti-abortion, right? And if you take this issue seriously, if you take, as you should, the assault on the right to have an abortion, right, which is also something that a word that the National Democratic Party is very afraid of saying, abortion. There should be no question in this race who you support, right? So all of these other things too that oftentimes get sort of lobbied against the left, which are BS. That we don't care about these issues. Who are the people who are actively undermining candidates who are running unabashedly in support of women's rights over their own body, the right to have an abortion, right? It's the National Democratic Party. In that clip, too, that we just played, Pelosi was complaining about all the attempts to undermine Obamacare. Well, that is a key position of Henry Cuellar, right? Somebody who time and time again has stood with Republicans against these kind of healthcare policies, right? It is just a bold-faced lie to sit here and say that the National Democratic Party takes those issues seriously when in this race, this is in their house, right? This is in their house. This is a Democratic primary. They are unwilling to stand up for these issues that they claim to hold so dearly.
Yeah, and look, like I think I just want to address the folks who are going to say, like, technically, there's no contradiction because she says she supports incumbents, and that's a primary, so she's supporting the women in that. But the point is, it doesn't cut it. That does not cut it. That excuse, at a certain point, you need to, and especially when it comes from a Nancy Pelosi who spends a lot of time disciplining the left of the party, like Ilhan Omar, for instance, implying that she's anti-Semitic. And there's been no action at all from the Democratic Party leadership on getting these folks in line, or the mansions in line, or the cinemas in line, because they like the function that those folks are playing, frankly, and they don't want to do anything about that politically. Look, maybe the leader of the party can't come out and support party challenges or whatever, and maybe that's like, but
that's BS too.
Exactly.
They're so willing to do that with everybody else. It's
exactly.
policy.
There's got to be action.
No, I know what you're saying, but I'm just saying, like, it's policy at the end of the day. They are much more comfortable with conservative and reactionary Democrats than they are with people who are actively wanting to change the status quo and actually start to deliver on some of the kind of vague promises that the Democratic Party puts forward, right? The Democratic Party has been running, for example, on doing something about abortion for my whole life, right? And time again, they have the power to do something and they don't. In this race, if you take this seriously, these are extraordinary circumstances, we're told, right? But not extraordinary enough to stand up again against one of the most right-wing Democrats in the party.
Who's also a legal liability.
Who's a legal liability, who very, very likely could stand up in the general election, even though that's a district that is considered to be relatively safe for the Democratic Party, could potentially have this legal liability continue to grow, potentially making him have to step down or drop out and opening up the door for a Republican. I guess calculus-wise, it probably doesn't make too much of a difference if it's a Republican or a Democrat in that seat when it comes to vote, just given the way that Cuellar votes. He time and time chooses the GOP over his own party. I mean, it's just a joke, absolute joke of a party, and that's why it's really important to support these kind of grassroots movements. And Jessica's campaign, which has been very much funded by small donations and people, instead of oil money and shady foreign governments.